As Senator Charles Stevens entered the barber shop in the hometown where he grew up, he heard a very familiar voice. He said, "Come down here and sit in my chair, Charlie," said Francis, the barber and proprietor of Frank's barber shop. Senator Stevens looked at him and said, "You know it's Senator Charlie now, right, Frank?" And Francis replied to him, "I know, but you'll always be Charlie to me. So sit down here and let me give you a haircut. I mean, I remember before you had went off and become a senator, you were just a little kid that came around here sweeping up hair, doing odd jobs for me, helping out around the shop. Do you remember that, Charlie, when you used to work here?" And Senator Stevens says, "I do remember that, and I can never thank you enough, Frank, for letting me work here. The extra money that I made here as a little kid was really helpful to me and my brothers and sisters. But you know, Frank, there aren't always people like you in every hometown in the state. There are a lot of families in need today, a lot of people that need help. And that's why I've come back, Frank. I've come back on a very special trip because I want to make people aware and make sure that they support." And before Senator Stevens could finish his season, Francis interrupted him and said, "Let's put aside that political stuff for now, Charlie. You just sit down in this chair and let me give you a haircut and tell me about how your brothers and sisters are doing." And Senator Stevens smiled on the outside, but on the inside, he said to himself, "This is going to be a lot harder than I thought it was going to be." Senator Stevens had returned to his hometown to help spread the word about a special referendum that was coming up in his state that a lot of people needed to vote on in September. It was a referendum that he believed in thoroughly because it was going to help a lot of people who were struggling during the economic depression that was hitting his state. And as he went on this tour, going from town to town, talking about the referendum, he was surprised that the place he had the most trouble talking about it was the town he grew up in. No one wanted to take him seriously. Everyone just saw him as the little boy Charlie who grew up there. They weren't open to seeing him as who he was now, Senator Charles Stevens, a state senator working for positive change in his state. And Senator Stevens' situation is not unique to him. I'm sure that all of us have experienced this personally, or maybe unintentionally done it to another person that we grew up with. It's difficult for us as people often to see past the image we previously had of someone. It's often difficult for us to see that people have changed, that the world has changed, and that things aren't the way they always used to be. And in fact, we see that this is happening to Jesus in our gospel reading today when he returns to his hometown of Nazareth. Now, our gospel reading is from the Gospel of Mark. It comes from the 6th chapter, verses 1 through 13. And we hear that in this part of Mark's telling of Jesus' story, Jesus has crossed back over the Sea of Galilee, and he's returned to his hometown of Nazareth. And there, Jesus is going to do what he always does. He's going to teach in the synagogue. He's going to heal people who come to him seeking healing. He's going to continue on his ministry as he's continued it everywhere else all across Galilee at this point in our story. But something's very different this time. This time the people hear him teaching and healing, and they can't believe what they hear and see. They can't believe Jesus is doing this because they knew Jesus before he started his ministry. They say to one another, "Isn't this Mary's son? How did he learn all of this? Wasn't he just a carpenter? Now he's some hotshot prophet and healer? Does he think he's better than us now? Does he think that we are less than them?" And they became offended by Jesus' presence. They couldn't move past their previous image of Jesus and see and experience Jesus as he was now, God's Messiah, trying to bring something new to their lives. And Jesus, because of their unbelief, could not do any great deeds of power in his hometown like he had done in all sorts of other places across Galilee. Like Senator Charles Stevens, no one could see Jesus as anything but the boy who grew up there, which led Jesus to remark that prophets are not without honor except in their hometowns and among their own kin. And while this is really sad that the people in Jesus' hometown wouldn't take him seriously, it also gives us here today something that we can find a little bit of comfort in, because we know that Jesus has experienced the same thing that we've probably experienced as well. It seems all people, no matter who comes to them, have a hard time believing that people can and do change in this world. Which I believe leads us to a larger truth for us here to reflect upon today and see being revealed in this reading for us this morning. And that is, we have to be careful as we look about and go about our lives to not miss all the things that God is doing all around us. It's easy in life to get very focused on one thing, to get very consumed of our way of viewing the world. And we have to be honest, as human beings, that's often the thing that we lead with the most. We have our image of things, our image of the world, our image of people, and that dominates our thinking and our perspective on life. And when we get too locked into that line of thought, we can miss what God's doing in the world all around us. Which means to us as followers of Jesus, we need to kind of redefine the way we think about the word belief. For belief means a lot more than just trusting that God exists. It means trusting that God is working for the betterment of our world, and that it is up to us to respond positively to it, unlike the people of Nazareth were doing with Jesus. So that is the point of reflection I think we can take home with us today from our gospel reading. And that is, what is the good work that God is doing all around us? And how can I respond positively to it? Which takes a lot of work. I know personally for myself, it's very easy for me to only focus on the things that aren't going right in my life. You can get really drilled down on the things that aren't perfect, or that you wish were better, or that you wish would come to fruition, and you can miss everything else that God is doing all around you. So that's the challenge of our scripture here today. To have us stop for a minute, step back, and look around us. Say, what is God doing in the world around us? Because God is working all the time, everywhere, for love, justice, and mercy. And where can we see God doing those things? And where can we respond positively to those things, instead of just being focused on all the things in our life that aren't exactly the way that we want it at this point in time? Now, after speaking about the old times with Frank the barber for a certain period of time, Charlie's haircut was done. And as he was getting up to leave, the senator reached into his wallet to pay Frank for the haircut. And Frank said, "No, Charlie, you don't have to pay. This one's on the house." But Senator Stevens insisted. And as he paid Frank for the haircut, he simultaneously handed him a flyer that said, "Vote for Referendum 15. He said, "Frankie, I thank you for the haircut. I thank you for your vote in the fall. And I thank you that you're going to put this flyer up in your window and tell everybody to vote for this referendum." Our scripture reading today touches on a lot of feelings and emotions that are very personal to, I think, each one of us. All of us have experienced this saying that Jesus says today, that prophets are not without honor except in their hometown and with their own kin. Some people are always going to see you as you were and not how you are today. And often, sadly, sometimes we do the same to others. But that's not the whole story of our gospel reading today. The larger lesson we can learn from Jesus' interaction with the people he grew up with in Nazareth is that sometimes it's easy to miss all the good things God is doing in the world all around us. Which is not good because we have an important part to play in that. The belief that we have as Christians is not simply trusting that God exists. It's trusting that God is working for good and joining in that work, responding positively to it. So our gospel reading today wants to lift us up and make us look at the world around us instead of being focused on all the things we get so easily focused on, and say, where is God doing good in the world around me? And how can I respond positively to that? So let us all this week open our hearts, our minds, and our eyes to see what God is doing and not make the same mistake that the people of Nazareth made about Jesus when he came into their midst to bring healing, love, and the good news of God's kingdom. Amen.